Today we're going to be learning Yoma daf samach bet. This is the daf for Shabbat. We're going to start from the bottom of samach aleph amud bet. We're actually going to go even further back to the Mishnah on samach amud aleph. The bottom of the Mishnah, it's at the end of the Mishnah. It said nishpach hadam. Okay, actually before that, im ad shelo gamar tamatanot bifnim. If the Kohen Gadol, when he was doing the sprinkling of the blood inside the Kodesh Kodashim, nishpach hadam. Before he finishes, he spills the blood. He brings new blood and he starts again from the inside. In other words, he has to redo it from the beginning, meaning he has to slaughter a new animal and start the blood all over again. But each of these stages is considered separate. So each of the sets of blood sprinklings separate into inside, outside the sanctuary, outside the Kodesh Kodashim, the Holy of Holies facing the Parochet, in the sanctuary, and in the sanctuary by the Mizbach HaZahav. Those three are separate, like the golden altar. Each one is independent. So therefore, if in the middle of one of those processes, he has to start from the beginning of that one. He doesn't have to start from the very beginning, but the beginning of that one. He starts wherever he left off. If you were in the middle of sprinkling number, you did 1 and then 3 down, and then you spill the blood, you start from number 4. To which the Gemara says at the bottom of Samach Aleph Amud Bet, Tanan Atam, a source is quoted a Braita. Usually Tanan Atam means it says in a Mishnah, but it really should be Tanu Rabbanan. It was said in a Braita. All of these things, meaning all of the animals that he had to slaughter, there's 3 of them now, let's say it happened 3 times. He spilled the blood at different points. And now all of those animals, what happens? They're mitameh begadim. They make the person who is dealing with the burning of it tameh, the person dealing with the animal, v'nisrafim beit hadeshen, and they have to be burned outside the city of Jerusalem in the Beit Hadeshen. Divrei Rabbi Elazar v'Rabbi Shimon. Chachamim omrim ein mitameh begadim ve'ein nisrafim beit hadeshen ela acharon ho'il v'gamar bo kapara. Only the last one, because the last one is the one that affected the atonement. Without that last one, the avoda wouldn't have worked. You have to finish it. This is why we always say finish the job. It's the finishing that's the most important. Okay, we'll see a bit of a debate about this later, about what's more important. But right now we're going to see that according to them, the last one is what affected the atonement, and therefore that's the most important. That's the only one that gets burnt. There's a bit of a debate. Is this only on Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon's position, or is it according to everybody, his question? But Rabbi asked Rav Nachman, Kama Seirim Mishalech. Each time, let's say it's a seir, it was the goat, and the goat's blood spilled, and you have to bring a new goat. Now, you can't just bring 1 goat, you have to bring 2 goats, because they have to go through a lottery process. So now the question is, what happens to all the goats? Do they all get sent out? And let's assume, if we say it's according to Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, they say all the goats have to be burned, like the ones that go LaHashem. So what about all the ones that go LaZazel? Do they all have to be sent LaZazel? To which Rav Nachman says, what kind of a crazy question? What, you're going to take a whole herd? Let's say it's 3, 4, 5, 6 of them. Let's say the blood keeps spilling. You're going to take a whole herd of animals and herd them out into the desert? LaZazel? Amarlo. So Rava says back to him, you're also not supposed to burn a whole flock of goats either. And yet, what does it say here? That Sorfina Beit Hadeshen, you burn them all in the Beit Hadeshen. So therefore, just like you shouldn't have to send them all LaZazel, you shouldn't also have to burn them all either. So the fact that we say you do burn them indicates maybe you would also send them all to Azazel. To which Rav Nachman says, Mi dame, you're comparing things that are not at all the same. Hatam lo ktivoto, hacha ktivoto. By the Shiur LaZazel, it says you're supposed to send v'shalach oto hamidbara. You have to send the goat out. V'shalach oto LaZazel hamidbara. So since it says oto is singular, that means only one. Itmar, and that's why it stands different from the ones that have to get burnt. Rav Papi Mishmei de Rava Amar, we're now going to have a debate about what Rava said. So Rava, in the end, it seems obvious, ended up agreeing with Rav Nachman that we don't send more than 1 Azazel, right, out to the desert. And we'll get to what Azazel is and all that in the next chapter. So Rav Papi Mishmei de Rava Amar, Rishon Mishalech. So if that's the case, which one do we send? There's going to be a machloket about what Rava thinks. So according to Rav Papi, Rava said the first one gets sent. Okay, it's the first one that went through the first lottery. That was the one that was chosen first. That one gets sent. Rav Shimi Mishmei de Rava Amar Acharon Mishalech. The last one gets sent. So Bishlama Rav Shimi makes a lot of sense. Mishmei de Rava Amar Acharon Mishalech. Why does that make sense? Kasavar, he holds Ho'il v'gamar bo kapara, as we saw before in that source, that Braita. That's the one that you finish atonement with. So therefore, since the last seir that went, you did a lottery the third time for the third seir, that one went to God. The other one goes Lazazel. That was the final one chosen, and it was chosen together with the one that gave the final atonement. Therefore, that's the one. But Ella, Rav Papi, Mishmei de Rava, my Kasavar, what does he hold? So the answer is, why does he hold the first one? What's so important about the first one? So, Savalak Rabbi Yossi, Damar, mitzvah berishon. The mitzvah is always with the first one chosen. You don't want to reject or something that, you want something that was the first one that was chosen, not reject necessarily, but this was the one that was chosen first. That gives it significance. If it was already, could have been used, it should be used. We shouldn't pass over something that was already chosen, goes by the first. So now the Gemara says, what do you mean he holds like Rabbi Yossi, Damar mitzvah berishon? Where do we see Rabbi Yossi holding mitzvah berishon? Hey, Rabbi Yossi, which Rabbi Yossi, in other words, not which Rabbi Yossi, but which opinion of Rabbi Yossi do we see where he says the mitzvah is in the first? If you want to say, we're going to go chazara on things we learned already. So if you learned shkalim and you learned pesachim, here's your review. Ditnan, it says in Masechet Shkalim, shalosh kupot shalosh se'im. If you remember, the money gets collected in three boxes. Each one holds 3 se'ah. That's a measurement of how much money it holds. Shebahem tromim et halishka. You do trumat halishka from these. If you remember, you do trumat halishka 3 times a year. Each time you do it from these 3 kupot that were collected. And haya katuv alehen. What do you do trumat halishka? You would take all the money out and start paying from that money for the sacrifices that are needed in that time period. Haya katuv alehen aleph bet gimel, and they were labeled with the numbers, the first 3 letters of the alphabet, aleph bet gimel, right? Like 1, 2, 3. Vitanya, and there's a Braita there that says, Amar Rabbi Yossi, Lama katuv alehen aleph bet gimel. Why does it say aleph bet gimel? Leida eze mehem nitrama rishon. Lavi emena rishon. We want to know which one was first because we want to bring from that one first. We want to start buying the sacrifices with the first box. Right? That way, if we run out, we don't need any more money. We'll have used all the money from the first box first. Only get to the second one later. Why? Shemitzvah b'rishon. Because the mitzvah is with the first one. There you have it. Rabbi Yossi holds that. But if you noticed, it was introduced by the words ilema. Ilema is im nomar, if you're going to say. To which the Gemara says, Dilma, no, you might not necessarily learn from here to our case. Dilma bi'idna de'itchaze kamaita lo itchaze batraita. When the first one was ready, the second one wasn't. Meaning, in the money case, when I bring my money for the sacrifices, I bring for the machatzita shekel, I bring my half shekel to the temple. As soon as I bring that money, it can be used to buy sacrifices. But you, let's say, bring your money the following week. Now, when I bring my money and it can go to pay the sacrifices, your money isn't there yet. So I'm the only one who's, so to speak, crossed the finish line. You haven't. But when it comes to the seirim, when is the point where we send the seirim lazazel? Only after we finish the whole process. Now, by the time we finish the process of all the sprinklings of the blood, at that point, when we cross the finish line, how many seirim do we have? In our example, we had 3, which means they're all equally relevant at that point. No one was really chosen before, even though theoretically we did the lottery earlier. But at the time we did the lottery, you couldn't have used them for sending lazazel. So at this point, when we get to the finish line and we're allowed to now, or we're up to the part where we could send them lazazel, and now we say, okay, who was our option? We have 3 equal options. No one really comes before the other because they're all in existence when we pass the finish line. Whereas when I pass the finish line by giving my money, and it could already be used to buy sacrifices, even if we don't use it right then, but it could have been, then your money wasn't even there yet. So that's why mine comes first. So you can't learn from one to the other. So let's move on to the next option. El Rabbi Yossi de Pesach. Like I said, we're going to learn also from Sachin. Ditnan, as it says in the Mishnah there, Hamafrish pischo ba'avad, v'ifrish acher tachtav. Somebody designates an animal for korban Pesach. Then he loses the animal. Then he brings another one in its place. And now we find the original one. So shnehem umdim, and both are in front of us. Eze mehem sheyirtzeh yakriv. He can sacrifice whichever one he wants. Divrei chachamim. Neither one has priority. Here comes in Rabbi Yossi, which is what we were looking for. Rabbi Yossi Omer mitzvah b'rishon. The mitzvah is really with the first one, so you take the original one that you chose, and that's the one that goes because that's the one that was originally meant to be sacrificed. And therefore, even though now we're standing in his Pesach and we have two options in front of us, we choose the one that was brought first. Likewise with the Shiur Lazazel. Rabbi Yossi there happens to continue. If the second one was actually better, then we go with the second one because it has a different advantage. But all things being equal, we go by the first. And with that, we're moving to the next chapter, which is going to connect a little bit to the ideas spoken about now. But with that, it's going to really move into a new topic about the Shiur Lazazel and what we do with it. Shnei Seirei Yom HaKippurim, mitzvatan shiyu shnehem shavim b'mar'eh u'bekoma u'bedamim u'belikichatan ke'echad. The two goats that we use on Yom Kippur, that one's going to go as a sacrifice to God, and the other's going to go Lazazel, which we'll explain all about that, what that means. The mitzvah is that they be both, and it's the ideal, they both look identical, they both have the same height, and they both be the same money value, and you buy them, purchase them at the same time, which really means from the same person. Now we're going to see that. Let's talk about a few of these things. How do you find two that are exactly identical? So the Tosfot Yeshanim on the side of the page in very small print in the inner column says, even though in Ben Sorer Moreh, which talks about a child who goes off the path and does various things, eats a lot of food, drinks a lot of wine, and doesn't listen to his parents. It says he doesn't listen to the voice of his father and his mother. And they learn from there, the voice of the parents has to be the same and they have to look the same and all that. And then it says, Ben Sorer Moreh never really happened because there is no such thing that two parents look alike. And even though some people claim that when you stay married long enough, you start looking like each other, hasn't really happened with me and my husband, but they do say that kind of a thing. But really, the Gemara says it never happened because you can never have a situation where both parents look identical. There's no such thing. So he says, but by animals, it maybe could be that animals look more similar. I was thinking about this. People talk about this when they talk about racism. That often, right, when you have a police lineup and it's someone from a different race or a different ethnicity and you don't really recognize people, and people often mistake people for other people because all people who are of a different type look similar because we're not as familiar with the differences of that type. So I was thinking it's like the way they say about the animals, right? Someone who works with animals all the time will tell you they definitely don't look alike. But if you're not used to being with animals all the time or you don't pay attention to those details, then you might think they look more similar. It's a possibility. In addition, then they quote the Yerushalmi here, which relates a little bit to what I was saying right now, which is even though, right, that they're still, he says, even though they're not really similar to each other. Tamrina b'Yerushalmi, in the Yerushalmi it says, even a stalk of wheat, each of them look different. They're really different. But they need to be somewhat similar. They have to look somewhat alike. By the way, I didn't point out, but in the comparison of the mother to the father, they compare humans to animals. Now, you might say mother to father is male, female, all the more so they're not going to look alike. They didn't bring a case of male to male. I guess there is no such example, or female to female. But you would imagine male to female, all the more so is going to look very different. Okay, so that's one thing about they have to look alike, right? They have to look somewhat similar, right? They can't be really identical because there's no such thing. What about value? So the Yerushalmi talks about that. What does it mean in value? Is it the market rate, or is it, what you paid for it, or what they're actually worth, right? You could theoretically buy two animals for the same price, but one you get a deal for, a bargain, and it's really worth a lot more. So that doesn't mean they're similar in value because you spent the same amount of money. It's how much they're actually valued at. Okay, and why likichatan ke'echad? So I think also it seems to be that if you buy them from the same person, then likely maybe you'll find ones that are more similar. But even if they end up not being, I'm back to the Mishnah now, even if they're not exactly identical, then they're still okay. Meaning this is something that you should try to do, but it's not critical. It's not essential. Usually we say, lo ma'akev. Doesn't prevent you from being able to go ahead anyway. If you bought one today and one tomorrow, it still is fine. Mate echad mehem, if one died. Okay, now we're back to similar to what we were discussing in the previous daf. If one of them dies, or at the beginning of today's daf, im ad shelo higril met yikach zug lasheni. If before you did the hagrala, before you did the lottery, which animal goes where? So you just add another animal, and now you have two, and you do the lottery, no problem. Im mishehigril, but if you already did the lottery, yavi zug acher v'yagril alehem betchila. You take another pair, and then you do a new hagrala, meaning even though you have, okay, well now we're going to see the two examples. I'll even just keep going. V'yomar, and they'll say like this. Im shel shem met. Okay, this isn't what he says, actually. It's not beginning of quote. It really means, and you'll say, if it's the one that was for God that died, okay, you have two next to each other. One was for God and it died. So now you have the one that was Lazazel. So what do? What you do is you take two new animals, you do a lottery, one goes to Azazel, one goes to God. The one that goes to God replaces the one that died. And the one that was originally there, Lazazel, stays Lazazel, and the other one is just an extra. What do we do with it? It's the one that went through the second lottery cycle. Sorry. No? Okay, that's it. It doesn't tell you. We'll get to it in a minute. Okay, so now if the one that died was the one that was supposed to go to Azazel, the one that the Goral landed on for Azazel, that one goes in place of it. The extra one was supposed to be brought as a sin offering. So that one is left to graze and gets sold, and its value goes to nidava. We've seen this many times, especially in Masachet Shkalim. Its value goes to korbanot olah that are offered, voluntary offerings that are offered on the mizbeach when there's nothing else happening. She'ein chatat tzibor meta. It doesn't have to be left to die because it's a communal offering. Yehuda disagrees and says, no. The second one is left to die. He apparently thinks chatat tzibor is left to die. Ve'oramar Rabbi Yehuda, he also says, nishpach adam yamut ha'mishtalech. If the blood spills, then the mishtalech has to be left to die also. And make a mishtalech, if the mishtalech dies, the one that's supposed to be sent, yishapech adam. You spill the blood of the other one. Basically, the first ones are irrelevant. You have to start from scratch. We'll get to understanding Rabbi Yehuda's shita much better further on in the Gemara. I believe it's on Samach Dalet and Samach Hey. Gemara starts off with drashan. We're going to have a drashan, the verses of the Sirim for Yom Kippur. We're then going to continue on with the same exact type of drasha in two other places in the Torah. Then we're going to say, why isn't the same type of drasha said in the fourth place? And then we're going to just mention very briefly that it's actually also true in a fifth place. Okay, the fourth place, it's not true for, we're going to get to this. That's the basic structure of what we're going to do now. Tanu Rabbanan. So the Braita says, Yikach shnei se'irei zim. The Torah says, Mei b'nei Israel. Okay, we're in Vayikra Tet Zayin, our chapter, verse 5. All of this is on the sheet. You should follow on the sheet. From the Bnei Israel, from the Jewish people, you should take Yikach shnei se'irei zim l'chatat. Should bring two goats for sin offering. So the Gemara says, the Braita says, Mi'ut se'irei shnayim. If it just said se'irei zim, goats plural means two. Matamud lamar shnei. So why did it need to say two? You really didn't need the word two. Shiur shnehem shavim. It's to teach you that both have to be identical. That's what we learn in this halacha. They have to be identical from the word shnei. But how do we know that it's not me'akev, as they say? It doesn't prevent you. If they're not identical, it's okay. You can still bring them. Talmud lomar se'ir. Okay, what's this? In the next few psukim, in verse 9 and 10, it says, Aaron brings the se'ir that got on, that the lottery fell out, that it's supposed to go to God. And then it says in the next verse, and the one that goes to Azazel, etc. So it says Hasi'ir about the one that goes to Hashem, and it says Hasi'ir about the one that goes to Azazel. And it calls them each by different names. That shows that what? That each one is separate, that each one has its own properties, basically. So that means Even if they're different, it's okay. To which the Braita says, wait a minute. The Braita says, actually, the Gemara says, the Gemara is commenting on the Braita now. It says, let's look at this Braita. The Braita said, it really could have just said Seirim plural. We would have known two. Why does it say two? To say that they have to be identical. How do we know it's okay if they're not? Because it says Seir, two separate, as if they're different, it's okay. To which the Gemara says, wait a minute. This worked on a particular assumption. Tama de Rabbi Rachmana. It's because the Torah taught us Seir, that taught us it's not ma'akev. It can be done without it. Halo Rabbi Rachmana, but if the Torah hadn't said that, Havamina psulim, we would have thought it was going to be disqualified. We would have thought it was ma'akev. It would prevent us from doing it. Ikuva menalam, where do we learn that this might prevent us from actually doing it? So they say, right, in other words, again, we have a drasha that says it doesn't, it's fine. But only because of the drasha we think it's fine. But if it weren't for the drasha, we would have thought it's not fine. How do we know that? Well, salkadat achamina shnei 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 ktiv. It says, pasuk zayin, v'lakach shnei asirin. Then it says, v'natan aharon al shnei asirin in the next verse. And then it says, v'kliva aharon et asir. Sorry, I skipped a verse. In the first verse, in Hey, it says, Me'ei b'nei Yisrael yikach shnei sirei. That was the first verse. So it says shnei 3 times. You learned already that when it comes to the realm of kodshim, things in the temple, if it says it twice, that means it has to be done that way. So the fact that it says shnei 3 times sounds like they have to be identical, and they have to be identical. It doesn't work otherwise. So the shnei 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 comes to say it is necessary. But then the Seir comes saying, no, even though you would think it would be necessary, it's not necessary. To which the Gemara says, wait a minute, Hashid Rabbi Rachmana Seir, because now you have Seir, and then it teaches you it's not critical. Shnei 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 lamali. So why do you have shnei 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 3 times? It doesn't teach you anything then. So the Gemara says, it teaches you something else. It teaches you all the 3 ways it has to be the same, which is, has to look the same, it has to have the same height, and it has to have the same value. That's why it says it 3 times. But again, that's only in the ideal world. If it doesn't happen, it's okay. We're going to see now 2 processes of the mitzorah, the leper. One is that he has to bring 2 kvasim, okay, and a kivsa, but we're going to talk about the 2 kvasim. And we're going to have the exact same structure of drasha that we just had. So now it says, by Tanya Namihachi. So there's an identical Braita by the Kivsei Mitzorah. Yikach shnei kvasim. So again, it says take 2 kvasim. Mi'ud kvasim shnayim. We're in Vayikra Yudalid Pasuk Yud. Mi'ud kvasim shnayim. Kvasim in general would mean 2. Mata v'lo shnei. So why does it say 2? Shei shnehem shavim. To teach you, they have to be identical. Uminayin she'afal pi she'en shnehem shavim ksherim. How do we know if they're not identical? They're still okay. Talmud Loma, keves liba. It's because it says, right? Keves, again, the same exact thing. In Pasuk Yud Bet, it says, v'lakach kohen et ha-keves ha'echad. And then it says, v'shachat et ha-keves b'makom asher yishchat et ha-chatan. So it talks about the kvasim, and in 2 different words, it uses 2 different words. Therefore, it comes to teach you, they don't have to be the same. To which, again, the Gemara says, once we finish this Braita, Tama de Rabbi Rachmana, it's because the Torah included it. Halav Rabbi Rahman. If we didn't have the keves, what would you have thought? Havamina psulim. You would have thought it would be disqualified. Ikuva menalam. Where do we learn that from? That it would be disqualified and it has to be done exactly this way. Were it not that we had the word keves. Salkadat achamina tihi yektiv. It says in the first verse of that section, pasuk bet, zot tieh Torah mitzorah. This will be the rule of the mitzorah. Should have just said zot Torah mitzorah. Why did it say this will be? Will be comes to teach you it has to be exactly this way. To which they now ask, like they did before. Well, if already we're going to say keves teaches you each one doesn't have to look the same, then why do we need to say it has to be done exactly in this way if it doesn't in the end have to be done exactly in this way? So the answer, l'shar havayatoshim mitzvah, they mean for all other laws of lepers, but not for this specific one, not that they have to be identical. Again, Tanyanami Gabe Mitzorah, there's another source Gabe Mitzorah, Ki Agavna, exactly like this. Now we're not going to talk about the 2 kvasim, the 2 goats, but we're going to talk about the 2 sorry, the 2 lambs, but we're going to talk about the 2 birds. Okay, the Mitzorah, you have to take 2 birds. Okay, what do? You take 2 birds, one you kill, one you set free. And this whole process you do with them, we've talked about it before. So it also says by Mitzorah ki agavna, same thing. Tziporim, again, what does it say? Tziva Kohen, we're on Vayikra Yudalid, Pasuk Dalid, that same chapter. Tziva Kohen v'lakach mitahel, the one who's getting purified from leprosy, shtei tziporim, 2 birds. So miut tziporim shnai. You already know. Tziporim, birds would mean 2. So why does it say shnei tziporim? Shtei tziporim. Talmud lomar shtei shushteen shavot, that they be identical. Uminayin shafal pishenan shavot kshirot. How do we know that? Again, this is not critical. If they're not exactly identical, it's okay. Talmud lomar tzipor tzipor riba, because it says tzipor twice, it means it includes both, right? That again, it says shachat et tzipor achat, and then it's tzipor achaya. So it calls each bird separately tzipor. That means they don't have to be identical. So again, the Gemara is going to say, Tama de Rabbe Rachmana. It's only because the Torah said it's not ma'akev. Otherwise, it would be essential. Halo Rabbe Rachmana psulot. If it hadn't said that, the tzipor, it would have been that they're disqualified. Ikuva manalam. Where do we learn that this is an important? Where would we have thought that this would be the ikuva? Salkadat achamina tiektiv. You would have thought tiektiv. It says tiek. Pahasha de Rabbe Rachmana tzipor tiek lamali. Again. Exact same answer as before, because it says Zotiyeh Torat Mitzvah, you would think it has to be identical. To which the Gemara says, well, then if it's not, that it has to be exactly this way, then why does it say Tiyeh? For all other laws of Mitzvah, but not that in the previous one, the lambs have to be identical, and not that the birds have to be identical. Now we're up to the 4th one. So we started with the Sirei Yom Kippurim. We went to the sheep of the leper. Then we moved to the birds of the leper. Now we're going to move to case 4, which I already told you. They're going to say, why don't we say this drasha in another place where we have the exact same structure? When it comes to the daily sacrifice, you have to bring every morning and every afternoon. It says there, we're in Bamidbar Kaf Chet, Pasuk Gimel. Asher takrivu la'Hashem kfasim b'nei shana tmimim. It says bring kfasim. There, notice it doesn't say shnei. Then it says shnayim liyom olat tamid, 2 per day. So now they say by tmidim it says kfasim miut kfasim shnayim. So matam olom shnayim. Why didn't he say 2 at the end of that verse? We already know it's 2. So it's shiur shnehem shavim. Again, this isn't a drasha. They're saying why didn't they say? We need both kfasim to be identical. Now, nobody says that here. So they're asking, why didn't anyone make a drasha here like that? Right? You could have then said, and how do you know that even though they're not, it's good anyway? Talmud lamar keves keves liba. In other words, it says keves keves, which is the next verse, Dalit. It says, et keves achad taseh baboker, et keves hasheni taseh ben arbaim. This one and that one. And then we'd say, listen, it's a mitzvah that they be identical, but if they're not, you could still fulfill the mitzvah without it. But nobody says that. So why not? So they say that shnayim is used for a different drasha, and that's why we don't darshan what we said here. Right? Remember, shnayim was to say they would have to be identical, both of them. So we need it for the following bright. Shnayim liyom teaches you kin neged hayom. They have to be done in the sunlight, directly in the sun. How do you know that shnayim liyom means they both have to be done to the light, in the light of the sun, and not that they both need to be done during the day? Maybe it just means during daylight hours. When it says keves echad, one of them bring in the morning, and the keves hasheni, the second one bring in the afternoon, that teaches you about the obligation of the day. That means it has to be done during the day because it says morning and afternoon, which is obviously daylight hours. Therefore, mani makayim shnayim liyom. So what's the shnayim liyom coming to say? Kin neged hayom. It must mean opposite with the sunlight coming in. Ketzad. So how does this work? Tamid shashachar yanishchat al keren tzfonit ma'aravit al tabat shniya. V'shal ben arbayim yanishchat al keren mizrachit tzfonit al tabat shniya. It's to teach you that when it comes to the Korban Tamid, where would they sacrifice it? So in the morning, okay, let's put, okay, this is north on the map and this is south. Again, I'm holding the map upside down. When you go to the north side and you do the shechita on the north, right? This is north of the altar. When you're standing at the altar, you go to the second row of rings and the one all the way on the western side or all the way on the eastern side, depending whether it's morning or night, well, morning or afternoon. In the morning, you're going to go to the western side. Why is that? Because the sun rises on the east. There's a wall here, right? The wall that separates where Shar Nicanor opens and lets people in. The wall is going to cast a shadow. Remember, this whole is all open space. The wall, right? Just the Heichal and the Ulam are covered. But this is all open. So the sun's going to come down. If you do it on the east side, it's going to be shadowed. If you go on the western side, it won't be. And the reverse of the afternoon, because the building here of the Heichal and the Ulam is going to create a shadow on the rings on the western side, and therefore we're going to move to the east. Okay, now, why the second row? That's a big debate. Not so clear why. Some people say because the altar itself will cast a shadow, but it doesn't really make perfect sense. But there's different answers given. I'll leave that issue aside right now. So now we're back to, so again, the morning one was done on the Tzfonit Ma'aravi, the northwest, on the second row of rings. And Ben Arbayim was done on the Kerem Mizrachit Tzfonit, on the eastern, northeastern side, on the second row of rings. Musafin shel Shabbat, okay, that was our fourth case. So our fourth case was about the keves, the kvasim for the Korban Tamid. Why don't they have to look alike? To which the Gemara says they don't need to because we need the shnayim for something else, which is that both need to be done in direct sunlight. Now they tell us Musafin shel Shabbat v'dai tzrichin shu shneihen shavin. When it says we read this every Shabbat in Musaf, shnei kvasim b'nei shana tmimim, two kvasim. Again, those two kvasim that comes from a pasuk. Those also have to be identical. Now, what's the difference, if you think about it, between the only one case where we don't say that versus all the other cases? So I think the one difference is those two kvasim for the morning and the afternoon are taken different times of day. They're never seen together. All the other pairs were taken at the same time. Then they split, but they start the same and then they split. Okay. So maybe that's why those are different rather than, right? Those are different than all the others. The only ones that don't really split are the two kvasim that you bring on Shabbat. But all the others end up a little bit different, although the kvasim for the mitzvah also aren't so different from each other. But either which way, they are both brought at the same time, and that's why they might need to be identical. Tanu Rabbanan. Shnei sirei Yom Kippurim sheshachatan bachutz. Now we're going to talk about two sirim that were slaughtered outside. What does that mean? You're not allowed to slaughter things that are supposed to be slaughtered inside. You can't slaughter them outside the temple. What if you did? You're obligated, karet, you get cut off. Right, which means you die young or your children die young, you die before your time, some sort of punishment that's pretty bad. Punishment in the hands of God. It's called shchute chutz, slaughtering outside. So if you took the two sirim of Yom Kippurim and you slaughtered them outside, if you haven't yet done the lottery, since both potentially can be brought as sacrifices, you're obligated on both of them. But Mishi Gril Alehem, Chayav al Shashem, Upatur al Shel Azazel. But once you did the Hagralah, the lottery, and it was determined this one was going to be slaughtered to God. Well, that one, if you slaughter it outside, it's definitely a problem. But the one that was supposed to go al Azazel, it was never supposed to be slaughtered at all. It doesn't get slaughtered. So if you slaughter it outside, that's not, you're not obligated because this wasn't Kachim, it was supposed to be slaughtered inside. To which the Gemara asks, but if you haven't yet done the lottery and only one is going to go to God and one is going to go to Azazel, so what are these worthy for really? Also, there's a bigger issue. Without doing the lottery, they're not anything. Until they're missing, it's called mechusar ma'aseh. They're missing some major action you need to do. Without that action, they can't be sacrificed. So until you do the lottery, you can't sacrifice them. So therefore, why would you be liable for slaughtering them outside? Both of these goats, it's true that they were supposed to be used for the korbanot, for the avodat Yom Kippurim, the special avodah, one for God, one for Azazel. But theoretically, you could have taken them that same day and slaughtered them for the regular seir, which is a korban that is brought on Yom Kippur as part of the korbanot musaf. So you could have the additional musaf offerings. You could have theoretically used both of these for the musaf. Therefore, that's why if you slaughter them outside, it's a problem. Not because one might have gone to God and one to Hazazel. No, it's not because of the one that might go to God. Because that's missing a maaseh. You can't bring it to God until you do the lottery. So this one is not missing any sort of action. You can already slaughter it right now. To which the Gemara says, wait a minute. You can't really slaughter it right now. Why is this seir that was brought inside is not ready right now? Because it's missing an action of the lottery. But the one that was done outside is also not worthy of anything because it's missing the rest of the avodot. You can't, everything's done in a particular order as we learned. So if you haven't even done the lottery, you certainly can't sacrifice this animal yet. It's missing all sorts of actions before it that have to happen before you can actually sacrifice it. To which the Gemara says, there's nothing in that animal itself that's preventing it from being slaughtered, except for the passage of time and actions that you do on other animals. But that's just that you need time to pass. You need the time to pass. You need to get to all the other actions. But that doesn't affect the seir itself. This seir itself, theoretically, if it weren't for the fact that we hadn't done other actions, you could slaughter it right now for the korban musaf. So something Rav Chisda holds, if it's missing zman, meaning it needs time to elapse, something that's not related to that animal has to happen in order to allow it to be sacrificed, then it's not considered mechusal anything. It really is potentially worthy of being sacrificed. And therefore, again, I want to make it very clear what's happening because it's a little confusing. The two seirim that are supposed to be for the Avodat Yom Kippurim, for the special Yom Kippur service, one to God, one Lazazel, before the lottery goes and we just designate which is going where, if you slaughter them outside, you're liable. Why? Because potentially you could have used them and slaughtered them for the musaf offerings. And even though you'd have to wait till later in the day, there's nothing that's preventing this animal from being slaughtered as a musaf offering, except for the fact that you in the end aren't going to use it for that. But the fact is it potentially could, and therefore that's why you're liable, karet, if you slaughter the seirim before the lottery. We'll stop here and we'll pick up with what Ravina says about this. He's going to infer something from Rav Chisda. We'll pick up with that on Sunday. So have a Shabbat Shalom or a Shavua Tov, everyone.